The Tower of London Prison is one of the most famous jails in history. It is known for the horrible killings, harsh punishments, and brutal beheadings that happened there. However, it was also home to many wealthy prisoners, as well as lower-class inmates. How was it to be locked up in the Tower of London? It depended on the crime the person was convicted of, their wealth, their social standing, and the time they were in prison. Inmates could do a lot of different things in jail. Some were even allowed to bring their servants with them, hold feasts, and even go on hunting trips. Let's look at what it's like to be locked up in the Tower of London. The Tower of London was originally not a prison. In its early stages, the Tower of London was not intended to serve as a jail. In its place, it was constructed as a fortification that surrounded the White Tower. During the year 1066, William the Conqueror constructed the later on the River Thames as a fortification with the purpose of protecting London and serving as an entrance to the capital city. This stronghold, on the other hand, continued to be utilized for different reasons throughout the course of time, including the keeping of a royal menagerie. Eventually, it evolved into one of the most terrible prisons where criminals and political enemies were condemned to meet horrible deaths. The first inmate at the Tower of London. In the year 1100, King Henry I became the ruler of England. During his reign, the Tower of London received its first prisoner. This event took place during his reign. Extortion, embezzlement, and simony were the charges that led to Ranulph Flambard's imprisonment in the Tower of London under the rule of King Henry I. In addition to his role as Bishop of Durham, Flambard had previously held the position of Chief Minister under William Rufus, the king's predecessor and brother. He lived an expensive lifestyle, which earned him widespread disdain from the general population. The infamous government practices and financial extortions that Rufus engaged in were attributed to Flambard as a scapegoat. Eventually, he arrived at the Tower of Silence. Nevertheless, in spite of the fact that he was confined, the king permitted him to continue leading his extravagant lifestyle and to bring his staff to the Tower of London prison. Flambard was also given a stipend and was able to access the best cuisine available within the institution. Even more impressively, he brought the finest wines and prepared lavish feasts. During this same period, Flambard was also making plans to absolve himself of his sentence by utilizing his political contacts. The failure of this approach prompted him to make the decision to flee, escaping from the Tower of London prison. Not only did Ranulph Flambard have the ability to lead a pleasant lifestyle, but he was also able to escape prison thanks to the loose security measures that were in place. Flambard's opulent lifestyle enabled him to do both of these things. A rope concealed within a wine barrel was brought into the tower by Flambard, who then proceeded to get the guards drunk. Flambard then made his escape by lowering himself down a large window where his companions were waiting with horses. This was done while the guards were so drunk that they were unable to see clearly. Together, they made their way out of England and established themselves in Normandy, where Flambard was given the position of principal advisor to Duke Robert. Flambard was the commander of Robert's army during the later part of July 1101 when they attempted to invade England. On the other hand, the invasion did not result in any casualties because Flambard was able to meet with King and the Treaty of Alton was signed. After Flambard made amends with the king, he was reinstated to the position he had previously held in the royal household. At the beginning of the 18th century, there was yet another spectacular escape from the Tower of London. William Maxwell, the 5th Earl of Nithsdale, had been dispatched to the Tower of London by King George I in order to secure his participation in the Jacobite uprising of 1715. In order to divert the attention of the guards, Maxwell, together with the assistance of his wife, Lady Winifred Maxwell, had a meal and a drink with them. During the time that the guards were occupied with drinking and ladies, Lady Maxwell posed as a lady in order to conceal her husband. After then, they managed to sneak out of England and escape from the tower. Torture in the 16th century. Beginning in the middle of the 1500s, the conditions of the Tower of London prisons were progressively deplorable for the inmates at that time. In spite of the fact that individuals with privileges continued to dwell in prisons, harsh punishments became the norm. During this historical period, England was going through a period of theological turmoil, and heretics were placed in prison on a regular basis until they converted to the Catholic faith. When people were being interrogated, torture was also a prevalent practice. For the purpose of coercing confessions from prisoners, they were frequently subjected to severe abuse. On the other hand, a significant number of confessions were not true, since inmates would confess to any crime in order to alleviate their suffering. While the English common law did not permit this, the ruling monarch had the authority to provide permission for it whenever he deemed it appropriate. It was Henry II who was the first king to issue a warrant of this kind. To be sure, scavenger's daughter was yet another common contraption that was utilized for the purpose of slowly crushing a prisoner. They would even hang detainees from the ceiling using their hands, according to the officers of the prison. Tormento de toca, also known as water cure, was another practice that required coercing a prisoner to consume an excessive amount of water, which had the potential to even result in the death of the individual. Other techniques included the use of thumbscrews, burning, and a contraption known as the brakes, which was supposed to be used to break teeth. Occasionally, convicts would also be held in a cell that was referred to as the Little Ease. This was a cell that was too short to allow the inmates to stand up, and it was too small for them to lie down in. Guy Fawkes, a Catholic conspirator who participated in the gunpowder plot in 1605, was one among the individuals who was held in this location. Beheadings at the Tower. In addition, executions were carried out often at the Tower of London. However, these executions were reserved solely for prisoners of great status. The vast majority of inmates were executed in public. On the other hand, the executions of a few inmates, such as Anne Boleyn, were carried out in front of only a small group of distinguished onlookers. A competent executioner was required to carry out the task in order to guarantee a speedy cause of death. Regarding Anne Boleyn, a headsman was sent in from France to serve as the head of the court. Several other prisoners, like Sir Thomas More, were able to alleviate some of their pain by giving a tip to the headmaster. Other methods of punishment. Prisoners of the royal family were susceptible to a variety of additional forms of punishment, including death. The Duke of Clarence, George Plantagenet, was killed when he drowned in a wine barrel. He was responsible for his murder. However, at this time, Edward IV's sons were put to death, and it was reported that their bones were discovered buried beneath the stairs of the White Tower. On the other hand, commoners were typically executed by hanging in front of the public. Furthermore, prisoners who had been subjected to charges of heresy or treason were executed by being burned at the stake. Several further inmates were crushed by the application of hefty weights. Some convicts made the conscious decision to terminate their lives in this manner, despite the fact that it was highly gruesome. The reason for this was that individuals who were punished with weights were given the opportunity to choose their heirs rather than having their possessions taken away by the crown. Additionally, they favored being squeezed with weights and going rather rapidly, as opposed to being slowly starved or being subjected to other methodologically gruesome practices. The wealthy prisoners at the Tower. When they were incarcerated at the Tower, wealthy prisoners lived in luxurious rooms and even went on hunting trips. On the other hand, authorities did not permit them to leave the prison. There were also awful outcomes for some of the royal prisoners. In 1533, Henry VIII gave the order for the ancient residence in the Tower to be redecorated in preparation for a feast that would take place prior to the coronation of his second wife, Anne Boleyn. After waiting for 3 years, he finally put her behind bars in those extremely beautiful royal chambers, and he later gave the order for her to be beheaded on Tower Green. During the year 1554, Elizabeth I was also held captive in the same royal rooms that her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been held captive in. On the other hand, Elizabeth did not experience the same destiny as her mother because, in the year 1559, she was awarded her freedom and crowned Queen of England. While this was going on, the statesman John Eliot, who was the son of a wealthy landowner, was confined to a cell that was chilly and gloomy, and there were no candles or opportunities for him to exercise. After some time had passed, he passed away in the Tower as a result of tuberculosis. In addition to being subjected to a variety of ailments and malnutrition, poor prisoners who did not have wealth or a title were condemned to live in conditions that were even more poor. It was common for them to perish as a result of being neglected or mistreated in their quarters. Duration of imprisonment. The length of imprisonment that each prisoner was incarcerated varied from person to person. There was no way to know how long they would be held in custody or what kind of punishment they would be subjected to without knowing. During their time in the tower, some inmates were only held there for a few days, while others were held there for years. As soon as their guilt was established, certain inmates were granted permission to leave the individual. The ransom was paid by the inmates themselves or their associates, which allowed them to be released. These captives were extremely wealthy and important. A great number of other people either died of famine, were put to death, or passed away naturally. Even the most fortunate few were able to flee. A prison of historic value. The inmates of the Tower of London prison were responsible for their own lives from the very beginning. Not only were public beheadings and other gruesome forms of punishment prevalent, but also sumptuous royal chambers were commonplace. Joseph Jacobs, a Nazi agent, was put to death by a firing squad on August 15, 1941, marking the final execution that took place at the Tower following the conclusion of the Second World War. The Tower is now recognized as a World Heritage Site and serves as the location for the Crown Jewels. There are millions of people that come to view the famed yeoman warders, popularly known as the Beefeaters, and the black ravens that defend the castle. This makes it one of the most popular attractions in the United Kingdom.